Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. We are lucky to have special guest Chris Ye on again. Not surprising, Chris. You've been busy. You've been away. We're definitely going to talk some of the amazing stuff you've been doing. But apparently, if Anthony Davis comes to the Lakers, you will just come running to a basketball. Not shocked.
Let me tell you, it's very seldom that you get the chance to once again trade for the best big man in the game, as the Lakers have done over and over again. But when it happens, you got to hopefully it has the same result it has had in the past when the Lakers traded for Wilt Chamberlain, when the Lakers traded for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, when the Lakers signed Shaquille O'Neal, when the Lakers traded for Pau Gasol. What do those all have in common? Championships.
And I know Lakers fans, it is always amusing, and I'm already seeing the kind of Twitter hubbubaloo of like, calm down, Lakers fans. But Lakers fans have such high expectations, and I think we've talked this before on the show. I'm amused because from a purely Bayesian standpoint, which we love to do on the show, you're not wrong. And Anthony Davis proves this. We look at most fans that go to ESPN Trade Machine. Me as the Nuggets fan, right? I could go into ESPN Trade Machine and go, oh my God, do you realize if they took Paul Millsap and Gary Harris and 3 first-round picks, they could trade for Anthony Davis? And everybody says, shut up. And they're right. Whereas the Lakers are like, what about, Kwame Brown and a future second-round pick for, how about Pau Gasol? And it inexplicably happens.
Don't forget Javaris Crittenden.
Oh, I completely forgot. I'm amazed you remember. All right. Sorry to put you third burner, Brian, but Brian Foster, co-host and producer of the show. You can find him on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. He's the man with many hats and the voice of God. Say hey, Brian.
What's going on, guys? And that's okay, Dre. If you're not cooking with all 4 burners, then come on, you're not serious anyway. And I love this show already because we're just moving straight to Anthony Davis. No talk about this NBA Finals at all. We can just move past that as far as I'm concerned.
Why don't we start with dessert? Because I think, especially the NBA Finals for the Warriors fan, it's going to be depressing on 2 fronts, and we'll see how fast we go through it. But I would be remiss in not talking about some of the stuff that happened in the NBA Finals. But last week I went on vacation. I went on a road trip to Colorado, and then Chris, you're actually in Colorado right now. We've missed each other on my business trips or fun trips, whatever, multiple times this year already now. But I went on a road trip, and my intent was to write up an easy piece on the finals, and I didn't even get to that. But then the Lakers traded for Anthony Davis, and then I didn't even get to that. And then, holy cow, I didn't even realize the draft was on, and so I didn't get to that. So I was just really, really behind. But last week was the wrong week to take vacation. But the big news, the Los Angeles Lakers, in exchange for, let me see if I can remember it all, Lonzo Ball, Josh Hart, Brandon Ingram, this year's 4th pick in the draft, and 3 future first-round picks got Anthony Davis to the Lakers.
Not quite right. It is 2 future first-round draft picks and pick swaps.
Oh, and I want to bring this up, and we always, I think invariably on the show we've joked about the Boxscore Geek drinking game, which is common things that I say or do regularly. So like every time I don't do candidly, every time I say candidly, if you put that in your drinking game, it's game over. But we do mention your book, either The Alliance or Blitzscaling, I think once a show now. And the reason we mentioned Blitzscaling, I think you'll appreciate this. It really lines up well with what we call Patrick's Picasso principle. And for those that don't remember, Patrick's Picasso principle is this idea that if you were to find a Picasso, or what you think is a Picasso, for a ridiculously discounted price, you don't barter, you just pay up for it and you go for it. And then you, with Reid Hoffman, wrote a bestseller that's taking the world by storm, as you've mentioned, has become part of the lexicon, Blitzscaling, which is a similar idea, which is saying, if you are a business that is going for a market where it's kind of a winner take all place, sometimes sacrificing efficiency or money, right? Efficiency, cost, whatever, to just get there trumps everything. And the reason I think that applies to the NBA is we know this about the NBA. There are 10 players. So that is a winner take all if ever I heard. There are like 10 players that dictate if you have a shot at the finals. So if you have a shot at Anthony Davis, you don't hesitate. And, a team, this has to make you laugh, right, Chris, is the Boston Celtics. Danny Ainge has been stockpiling assets, stockpiling picks. It's amazing. And we have watched him get gun shy, right? I believe Jimmy Butler was on the table. We would have argued, but I actually would have thought it was a good move. DeMarcus Cousins was on the table, and he's just been gun shy. He stockpiles all these picks and is like, when time comes up to spend him, he refuses to. So I think from a blitzscaling perspective, the Lakers did it. They went all in on a player you need to win, and they're going to build the team afterwards. Whereas the Celtics have built a very stable team, a very good team. It's going to get you to the conference finals, but it's not going to go over the hump.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And this is a great time to bring up the famous astronomer Johannes Kepler. So bear with me. So Johannes Kepler, famous astronomer, discovered elliptical orbits or came up with the theory of elliptical orbits. Kepler wanted to get married. And he had to decide, well, how many women am I going to have to meet before I decide who I'm going to marry? Because if I meet a first woman, how do I know that she's the right one? So maybe I meet a second woman. But curiously enough, after you meet a woman, you say, hold on, I got to meet someone else. She usually doesn't want to marry you. So he had to mathematically figure out how to know when was the time to jump in. And it turns out that mathematically what you want to do is you want to figure out how many you want to go through at most. And then basically after you've gotten through 37% of those, then take the next one that's better than all the previous ones.
Interesting. Huh.
So Danny Ainge was like the astronomer who decided he was just going to keep waiting and waiting and waiting for that perfect wife to marry. Meanwhile, the Lakers see Anthony Davis and said, you know what? Not getting better than this. Put it all on the table and make it happen.
And I think another important part, I feel vindicated. I'm going to see if I can remember the things to pat ourselves on the back about this season, because there have been some stuff. So brief tangent. You did something that I hate, Chris, which is right after the DeAndre Jordan trade this year, and I have to take an excuse to brag about this. So the DeAndre Jordan trade happened this year, and very much like Dave Barry's article on draft picks, I came out and said, look, I'm going to give you my take. I'm not giving you a prediction. I'm saying here is an analysis of what has happened. I can't predict the future. And of course, you went into the comments and were like, what do you think about the future? I was like, damn it, Chris. But I came out and I said, I figure they'll win 33 to 38 wins. And lo and behold, they actually got 33 wins with some injuries to Luka Doncic. I was like, I'm going to count it. Similarly, when we talked about Anthony Davis right before the trade deadline, so we were talking about them trying to acquire them. I believe you were on the show for that. We said we didn't think the Lakers made a mistake in going as hard as they did before the trade deadline this last season. And I think we're absolutely right, especially now that it has worked out as well. I think this idea that people say, oh my goodness, you put everything on the table to try and get a star and you failed, you failures. I think the Lakers have shown you've really got to do that. And on 2 tries. So from the Kepler perspective, right, it only took him 2 tries as opposed to Danny Ainge, who's on, I don't know how many good-looking prospects have come in front of the Celtics now that he's passed on, but I prefer the Lakers at this point.
Well, I hope the Celtics enjoy their team of Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Gordon Hayward, and Marcus Smart, because that's what they're stuck with.
And so actually, we'll have to see, because Al Horford, right, that's the big news. He didn't opt in. If he comes back, I'm assuming he's doing the logical thing, saying, this is probably my last major contract. So I can't do 1 year. I got to do multiple years. And he definitely has value because he played well last season. We'll see if he's back with the Celtics, but we'll see what happens. I'm hearing things like Clippers floated. I really hope he doesn't go to the Lakers. We'll have to see what happens there.
A lot of teams have cap space.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, actually, so this brings us to an interesting point. I'm curious if you have more insight, because I've kind of only honestly been doing kind of the Twitter reading of it. As I mentioned, I've been on vacation. So allegedly, Rob Pelinka did not realize the importance of when to finalize it. This is what I'm hearing, so I might want some clarification on. Rob Pelinka apparently didn't realize the importance of when to finalize the trade, meaning by finalizing it, I think July 4th instead of July 30th, the amount that the cap is impacted is counted as, instead of being counted as the draft pick, is counted as something else. So instead of having room for a supermax contract there at $24 million, somewhere around there, and the other hope was if Anthony Davis opted out of his trade kicker, they might have enough, but he did not opt out. And we have no fault with that. Anthony Davis should not. And so there's this belief that Rob Pelinka did not realize how the collective bargaining agreement works and maybe made a mistake. And as a result, the Lakers, instead of having enough cap space to say go up to Kawhi or Durant, although, Durant, who knows when he's going to be back at this point, to go up to either one of them and say, here is all the money, please come play with us. At most, they can kind of do a Klay Thompson situation, which happened a few years ago, which is offer as close to the max as possible, but not quite a max. And even if that happens, they're kind of out of money to spend on anybody else.
Yeah, so I think this is maybe a little overblown. So I think that when the trade first went through, a lot of Laker fans got excited because they thought we're going to have the complete max cap space. But I'm not sure that was ever going to be the case. I think Pelinka is actually pretty smart when it comes to the cap, as you can tell by their handling of Luol Deng's contract. So Luol Deng, they went ahead and used the waive and stretch provision on Luol Deng, but they waited to do it until after his salary was guaranteed for last year. So that dramatically reduced the amount of dead cap space that Luol Deng was holding, and that came out of nowhere. People didn't think that the Lakers came as a surprise, and it's an indication that Pelinka actually does understand the cap. Now, what happened there is the Lakers needed to be able to trade Lonzo and Brandon and the number 4 pick and have the number 4 pick be signed by the team that they traded the number 4 pick to in order to get that max cap space. So that's basically the cap machination. The cap hold for the once the number 4 pick is signed, they become salary for the purposes of salary cap and can be included in the trade. And so what's happening instead is it looks like the deal is going to occur on July 6th, which means that the pick will not be considered to have already signed, which means the Lakers are stuck with a lower cap figure. But it doesn't matter, right? If the Lakers said, we're going to blow up this trade unless you, New Orleans, keep the number 4 pick, I don't necessarily – it may be that they could have gotten New Orleans to do that. Apparently, as we can tell, wanted to trade that pick and trade, which is exactly what they did. And now that you have a third team involved, it's basically impossible to pull the
it looks like
salary cap.
Okay,
slot.
you're back, Chris. You're back. We're getting a little delayed here.
Hopefully we were getting a little bit of Skype lag, but and then what I'll say on that trade. So that does get interesting because I think anytime you get a trade with lots of moving pieces, we think of NBA 2K about how easy that is, and we don't know the real world. And I think we always bring up on the show how there is a lot of wrestling element to the NBA. So we as fans want to project. And so because of the Pelinka, Magic Johnson fallout or whatever, I think there is a lot of honest to be like, oh, this person doesn't know what they're doing. And it might be possible he's learning on the job too. That's another thing I've heard. But you're saying it sounds more like it was just a case of you're trying to get two sides to agree to everything, and this is kind of what they settled on. And that is most good business, which is neither side is 100% happy.
And there is still a way actually for the Lakers to open up max cap space. And that is if, as part of this three-way trade, they can get the Atlanta Hawks to take on Moritz Wagner, Isaac Bonga, and Jamario Jones. If that happens, the Lakers will have traded every single player they have under contract except for Kyle Kuzma and LeBron James. But that will actually open up max cap space. Interesting.
And I mean, that was one thing I think we were a little sad on. Of the prospects they traded, this is a fascinating one where I think losing Ingram is probably net positive for the Lakers. Feels harsh to say that, but basically Ingram and Kuzma were horrible last season. And they kept Kuzma, but what gets fascinating about Kuzma now is with Kuzma, Anthony Davis, and LeBron, the dynamics of that front court change dramatically from where they are. And standard age curve is the only player we've seen really kind of do the opposite is Andrew Wiggins. But as long as Kuzma doesn't pull an Andrew Wiggins, we should actually expect the players that the Lakers have to do kind of well.
Yeah, and I think that, in looking over the trade, if I were to say, hey, a Lakers fan, what do I wish? Of course, I wish the Lakers could have kept Lonzo, but there was no way to do the trade without giving up Lonzo. A, because the Pelicans wanted him, and B, because they needed the salaries in order to match up with Anthony Davis's salary. So that's something that, it's a sacrifice. I wish the Lakers still had Lonzo. I'm still a Lonzo fan, but it was a sacrifice that was necessary for Anthony Davis. And if you ask me, would you trade Lonzo for Anthony Davis? The answer, of course, is yes. What I do regret is that the Lakers didn't choose to keep Josh Hart instead of Kuzma.
Do we know for 100%? Because I think that's another part is when we're watching trades from the outside, we as I was saying, we project. We don't know if the Pelicans went, we don't want Kuzma, we want Hart. I know a lot of people were saying that they wanted Kuzma, but who knows?
It's possible, and David Griffin is a savvy guy, that that the Pelicans wanted Hart rather than Kuzma. But there are also non-basketball reasons why the Lakers might have kept Kuzma. So Kuzma has been very popular with the fan base. He's been the Laker that's done the most of those sort of public things. He's very popular with the front office and with the ownership. And most importantly, he's very popular with LeBron James. So you could see him. Kuzma is very clever. He cozied up to ownership and he cozied up to LeBron James. There's even this very funny video of them on the sidelines when they're both injured, and Kuzma is helping LeBron put on a necklace.
Like he's part of the entourage.
Yeah.
And the other
Kuzma played this right. He's going to end up on a team with LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Nobody's going to guard him, and he's going to get to continue to live in LA and be part of a glamorous Lakers team.
Dre, could I just say briefly on the cap space? This is total Picasso principle stuff, right? If the Lakers mess around and wait, because they're going to have to wait a lot longer than July 6th if they want to clear out all that cap space, the trade could blow up then. Anthony Davis could go somewhere else. I mean, you have to pull the trigger when you can. I agree with Chris. Pelinka did the right thing here.
Well, I mean, I think this cuts to the crux of blitzscaling, which is to say there are lots of ways we can analyze this trade and say it was not optimal, it was not efficient. And to your own Warriors, this is a popular story you've told me about your Warriors, Brian, which is when the deal was on the table, apparently Lacob came up and said, you're asking me, I think, for $425 million. I'll give you 450, but it has to be in the next 48 hours or something like that. I believe that's and it's the same thing here where I think with Pelinka, if they're sitting at the bargaining table back and forth, Kuzma, we do it the 6th, and they go, no, Hart, we do it the 30th, and back and forth. And eventually they both say yes. At that point, you should really just get up and walk out of the room and say, we both said yes. I'll send you the paperwork, and not try and optimize it. This it's funny because I brought up NBA 2K. I don't know if you know this about the game. There's an easy hack around it, but at least in old versions, I haven't played in a couple of years. It used to be if you offered a player a contract that was so offensive, the game would say they refused to deal with you. That was their hack. Of course, all you had to do is reset the game and try again. So you could say, I'm going to offer Kevin Durant $20 million. And he'd go, I'm offended, I'm coming back. And you'd reset the game and go $21 million and do that over and over. You can't do that in the real world. So I think that is the key here. Whatever they got to get Anthony Davis, they won. And that is the key thesis, the key point I want to have. The Lakers got the best player in the trade. And the draft of an article I wrote that's 70% complete on this, I brought up the Jeff Van Gundy principle. He said this in regards to Tracy McGrady for Steve Francis back in the day. He said, whatever team gets the best player in the trade wins the trade.
Yeah, and Dre, you mentioned the Celtics earlier. There is an article today saying that both the 76ers and the Celtics did not trade for Kawhi Leonard because they couldn't get a guarantee that he would stay there next year. So the Raptors didn't, and they traded for him, then they won the title. I bet if he had gone to the 76ers or Boston instead, they might have won the title.
Well, clearly on the 76ers with how they performed, if you have Kawhi instead of Tobias, I don't know if they still would have gotten what's his name, Butler, but clearly they were this close to making it. And obviously, the fact that Kawhi made the game winner, that's the difference right there.
Yeah, and again, as Dave Barry said a long time ago, the short supply of tall people. You got to get the best players in the game. That's how you win championships.
And I figured we could finish this last point that I just want key, which is future draft picks, because this is a point I harp on and that gives me an excuse to harp on again. I've made this argument before. I'm going to put it out there again. I'm going to have two arguments, one on future draft picks, one on this year's draft pick. Future draft picks for non-lottery NBA teams are next to worthless. And so when I see people doing these lists of, can you believe the Pelicans got these three players? And same as you, Chris, I'm like, dang, wish they could have kept Lonzo and Hart, but sorry, Anthony Davis is better than both of them. So that's the first thing. And then they list all of these picks, and I'm because especially the same point you were making, because they traded down, people are now cheating and listing 2 extra picks, right? So like, oh my God, they got these 3 players and 5 picks. And I look and I'm like, you know what? 4 of those picks are worthless. 4 of those picks don't mean a damn thing. And part of the reason is, as we saw with your Warriors, Brian, you can buy into the first round of the draft. It's fairly, you can buy or trade up. The San Antonio Spurs with Kawhi traded for the 15th pick with just a reasonable role player. So if Kuzma develops into something and a player drops to the number 15 spot, they have an asset to trade in the future. And then additionally, yeah, because you're allowed to trade up and because we have no idea what those picks will be, that those are next to worthless as compared to, a player we know. So that's the first one. Second point is on the number 4 pick, which they acquired. This is actually makes me sad that it's right, and the NBA should feel ashamed with themselves, which is the only real difference in this trade is the Lakers offered trade deadline, and that pick wouldn't have been part of the deal. And the reason it was is because after the trade deadline, both the Pelicans and the Lakers knew they were ostensibly out of the playoffs. And so both of them were like, hey, LeBron, hey, Anthony Davis, take it easy. LeBron, go out there, get your 20 points and then sit down. Or Anthony Davis, we're going to rest you for, medical reasons is what they were doing. So they were resting him on back-to-backs and stuff like that. Both teams got better draft picks as a result. And this is troubling to me. I've got lots to say on what the NBA did on their recent draft changes. But what they have now done is incentivize teams to say, instead of making a trade deadline trade, which could help another team, I should hold on to that asset knowing that team wants it because that's going to up the value of their draft pick for this next draft. And I am mad that is an incentive, is an even bigger incentive than it used to be with the rules changes they made to the draft lottery.
Yeah, and this season's draft results show that the NBA dramatically changed the tanking incentives. Now the tanking incentive is not to be the worst team in the league. It's if it doesn't look like you're going to make the playoffs, just to tank a little bit, and you can dramatically increase your chances of getting a higher draft pick.
And I believe Brian said this on a previous show. There's a funny method of doing this, which is actually kind of a win-win in a bad way, which is you play Anthony Davis 24 minutes instead of a full 36. The fans still get to see him. You don't win the game. In fact, I think it was the Pelicans. There was this overtime game that they completely choked and lost. And if you look at it, you're like, it's hard not to be a Patrick Ewing conspiracy theory person here to go, did they really choke and lose the game? Or did the coach say, hey, look, it doesn't do us any good to win this in overtime. We've already given the fans their money's worth. Maybe don't make that inbound pass correctly.
I'll double down on that, Dre. I think that was a genius plan. Because they did want to tank. They didn't want to win. They wanted to keep Anthony Davis happy and not get him hurt. But they wanted to avoid the ire of the league by benching their stars, which, for road games and even home games for that matter, the league doesn't like. So I thought they threaded the needle on that one. That was an interesting choice.
Yeah. And they ended up getting the number 1 pick. So their tanking was rewarded.
Yeah, that's what bugs me is the league was mad at the Pelican. There's a lot of stuff where the league does this. They yell at Magic Johnson for potentially tampering. They yell at the Pelicans for doing this stuff. And at the end of the day, if it gets people what they want, it doesn't really matter. I want to talk the draft a little if that works. Unfortunately for your Lakers, Chris, they only drafted 1 player, and according to Dave Barry's notes, he should probably repeat NBA College 101.
Yeah, so the player they drafted is a guy named Talen Horton-Tucker, somebody whom no Laker fan had heard of as of the day before the draft, and somebody whom every Laker fan has been investigating ever since. What's interesting about Horton-Tucker is his physical dimensions, which always scares me a little bit. It's like, wait a minute, shouldn't you judge whether the guy can play basketball rather than just how his measurements are at the combine. But in terms of his measurements at the combine, he's a 6'4" guard with a 7'1" wingspan, 9 3/4-inch hands, so Kawhi size, and he weighs 238 pounds. So he's got the most unusual set of dimensions that you'll ever see for a guard.
And so, unfortunately, this gets very much to the Moneyball stuff we bring up all the time. We're not selling jeans here. He's a 5-tool player, but is that what we really need? At the same time, I kind of want to use that as an excuse to explain why the Nuggets won the draft and my philosophy on the draft, which is we shouldn't expect this player to do anything immediately. That is the right maneuver in approaching the NBA draft. And the Denver Nuggets drafted, I hope I get the pronunciation right, just Bull.
Yep.
It's the son of Manute Bull. The second tallest player to play in the NBA, and unfortunately died tragically young due to a kidney condition. But his son's made the NBA. He is only, in comparison to his dad, 7'1", a touch lower without shoes. According to Dave, so we should mention this. Dave Barry did his draft preview this year, and what he explained it as, and this, I'm glad this metaphor has finally made it out, is that he explained it as he's a college professor. He is essentially giving a grade to all of these people for how they did last year in college. And I said it, he's basically grading college basketball 101. And that's essentially what the Wins Produced is doing as well. We are giving you a grade for NBA basketball 200. And that doesn't mean you'll do better. And in fact, two of the comments, Brian, we didn't discuss comments from last week, but two of the comments were like, can you predict it? And by the way, for that, Arturo Galletti at American Numbers, and it's arturogaletti.wordpress.com, has produced a model where he does factor in things like strength of schedule of college, age, height, etc., to project the future. I did not look at how your draft did there, Chris. He might be a little better given those dimensions.
I will say that what I always like to remind us all is that nobody knows anything, because Andre Drummond looked like he'd be horrible coming out of college.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, but that's where this gets interesting. Two players in the NBA that have become the new hot thing are Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. And last year, we actually had to agree with Donovan Mitchell, where Donovan Mitchell was arguing Ben Simmons did not deserve Rookie of the Year. Now, we don't agree with that because they're very set criteria for NBA Rookie of the Year, and there's a precedent, Larry Bird and Blake Griffin before Ben Simmons, so that there's nothing out of the ordinary there. But Ben Simmons missed a year of his rookie contract and basically sat and trained with the 76ers. And then he came in and he was the way I phrased it is he is the best rookie since Tim Duncan, in the sense that he was a star level rookie on a playoff team. Most of the times, even when we get our Chris Pauls, our Andre Drummonds, they're on teams that aren't going anywhere. So they have this amazing season and we praise them, and the team wins 25 wins and goes back to the draft lottery. But Ben Simmons got a year to train with the team. And we agree that training with a professional basketball team is much preferred to any college system. We just think that's the case. The Nuggets last year, is it Michael Porter Jr.?
Michael Porter Jr.
Michael Porter Jr. last year and Bol this year both dropped in rankings because of injuries. So basically, I forget Michael Porter. I think he was 6th or 7th on the high school draft rank. It's really cool basketball reference.
Oh, he was coming into the season. Many people believed he'd be the number 1 pick.
So yeah, he's top of the. I'll see if I can get that up in front of me, but I might not be able to. But yeah, so his standing out of high school is huge. He suffers, I believe, a back injury the very first game. You're right. He was number 2 in the recruitment rank, and I'll see if I can find his back. So that happens, but the Nuggets picked him up, I think, with the 16th pick in the draft, something like that, which is huge. And then they've just kept him here. Bol also dropped. He was supposed to be a first-round pick, dropped to the second round. I believe he had a leg injury of some sort that limited him at the end of the season. If all both of these players do is ride the bench with the Nuggets and slowly get ramped up to speed and are kind of prospects in like a baseball sense, that is huge for them. And so that's the Nuggets win the draft because the Pelicans, in theory, according to Dave Barry's numbers, they get to say they won, right? We traded Anthony Davis. We got the best 2 players in the draft, according to Dave Barry's numbers, in the sense I'm going to say production and their freshmen. So there were 3 freshmen on Dave Barry's A list in terms of the top college students. The New Orleans Pelicans got 2 of them. That being said, they're going to have to wait for those players to ramp up. The Nuggets, on the other hand, are already a contender that now has 2 prospects that they can slowly ramp up.
By the way, I'm surprised the Nuggets haven't yet signed Michael Porter Jr.'s younger brother, Jonte Porter.
Oh, so this gets
that's smart
too. There's an Otto Porter, and they're not related. Otto Porter Jr. and they're not related. So that's. And so where did Jonte? You said DeJounte or
Jonte Porter. He was undrafted.
Oh yeah, and what was the other one we were talking before was Taco Falls, right? Or Taco? How's it said?
Taco Fall.
And we can see. I'm happy you're on the show, Chris, because you actually follow college basketball, whereas I'm in the dark, and I third party that. Dave Barry puts up the numbers, etc., and then I just read the names for him.
Taco Fall, Dre, he's a senior from UCF. He's the 3rd top to the B list with Cameron Jordan and Ty Jerome. So he was one of the best players in college basketball last season.
And then the last point, I would be remiss if I didn't get back to the Lakers. One of the greatest Lakers of all time, Chris, one of your favorites, Kobe Bryant. I always bring this up. If you look at Kobe Bryant, he was drafted as a high schooler, but he came off the bench a lot his first season. He didn't have full minutes. He was slowly ramped up to a starter's role, and he went on to be the franchise. And I feel too many people fall for the Carmelo Anthony role. We've got to get him in immediately, and they pick up bad habits. So that's why I'm really, really excited for the Nuggets, and I think they won because I think they have 2 young, very talented players that can slowly get ramped into a system that's already ready for them, as opposed to, hate to sound mean about this, I think it's entirely possible the Pelicans messed up one or both. So the other one was Hayes, I believe.
Jackson Hayes.
Jackson Hayes. There's a good chance they mess up Zion or Jackson, or just waste them, right? They waste Zion just like they wasted
Here's
Anthony.
the real point, Dre. When you're trading Anthony Davis, you can't get a player as good in return, but you can try to get like some kind of star, right? Like they could have gotten 1 or 2 like really good rotation players that could step in right away, but they're going to do this tanking rebuild thing, and I always say it's like selling a bill of good to your fans.
Well, the other thing that we should mention about the Nuggets is the only thing that can hold them back is when they inevitably give Jamal Murray a max contract.
Oh, no.
It's their backcourt's been...
Hate to break it to you, it's going to happen.
Well, what's really rough is their backcourt of Jamal Murray, Gary Harris, and Will Barton have looked good, but they've all looked banged up, and I get worried. And now we have Monte Morris, who's this young player that's second round and looks fantastic, but isn't getting play. So I think I said this to Brian right after the Nuggets were eliminated from the playoffs. I'm going to remain optimistic for a while. Arturo Galletti gave me permission to do that, and then when they do that, you'll hear me scream on Twitter. But he was briefly he has been briefly worth it for a stretch. I'm sounding like you're getting me to sound like a conventional fan, Chris, because for a full season, no, he's never been worth it. But there have been stretches where he looks like it.
Let's see. Jamal Murray last season was his best season ever. He only was 0.7 points under par.
Ouch. Well, he looked really good at the start of the season.
He takes a lot of shots.
All right, let's see what else we got to talk.
On the plus side, at least I guess in a world in which D'Angelo Russell is considered an all-star, I'm sure Jamal Murray will be an all-star soon too.
Well, that's more than the D'Angelo Russell. The fact that people think the Lakers lost, that was driving me mad this last season. Let me just stress this point again. It's a lot of Chris letting me use you as a soundboard to repeat stuff I say all the time, which is, if you were going to be described as an offensive scorer in the NBA, you have to score above league average. And so for what it's worth, Kobe Bryant, until his very, very last contract, was an above average NBA scorer. D'Angelo Russell, I believe, was just below league average, if not a little below league average last season in terms of true shooting percentage.
He was below the true shooting percentage, the average true shooting percentage for a point guard. He exactly came in at 100. So he was exactly at 0.0 points over par, which was his best season by a wide margin.
And for what it's worth, on a rookie contract, absolutely worth the deal. That's a fantastic, very similar. Lance Stevenson for the Lakers last season, we'd call him probably a replacement level player, but at that contract, completely worth it. When D'Angelo Russell gets the big payday, Although I've got to give you credit for this, Chris. You said this to me on Twitter, and I'm waiting for this because it's going to happen. D'Angelo Russell's going to get signed by Utah. That's one of the big premier names. And somehow,
Dre, they traded for Mike Conley.
Oh, they did trade for Mike Conley, so it's good. And okay, so you had joked, so good. I don't have to worry about this happening. If they had traded or purchased D'Angelo Russell, somehow D'Angelo Russell and Donovan Mitchell were going to have some perfect synergy and be the best backcourt since Clyde Drexler and Terry Porter, and I would never hear the end of it. So I was waiting for that to happen. It didn't. And actually, yeah, Brian, I didn't even put that on the script, but what makes me sad is it was Kyle Korver, Jay Crowder, and a horrible player. I'm trying to remember. It starts with a G, I believe.
I don't have that up. Let me get it up.
I think Gary Neal or something. They traded 3 horrible players for Mike Conley. So the Utah Jazz actually improve on that trade. We think Mike Conley's probably overpaid and an injury risk, but they upgraded their roster.
Yeah, one thing I'll say about that, I have to look at this trade because it's really interesting to me. So the thing is, they're probably not going to keep Ricky Rubio, right? Unless he's on the bench, he's probably getting paid too much. So
they traded Ricky Rubio. Ricky Rubio, I think, or was he? They're not keeping him. I'll put it that way. I thought he was part of the trade, but I don't know.
Yeah,
they're not
I
keeping
assume
him.
so. So the point is, I'd rather have Ricky Rubio at his contract than Mike Conley at his contract. That's all. But Mike Conley's still really good.
Take a look. Ricky Rubio has been injured and declining, and
that's true. He's older,
8 years old, but it's, we look at players like Derrick Rose and others that they just get banged up and they hit a breaking point, and you might get a Paul George who bounces back, but Ricky Rubio did not look good last season. Mike Conley did.
Yeah, I'm coming around on this fast. So here's the full trade, Dre. It was Grayson Allen, right, young player out of Duke who doesn't matter.
There.
Kyle Korver, Jay Crowder, and the 23 pick. So it was really like just a salary dump for a draft pick, right? They wanted to make way for Ja Morant. So, yeah, good job, Utah.
And Utah, I mean, they're gonna, to your point, they're gonna be overpaying for Mike Conley. I'm gonna try and look at Spotrac really quick. Forgot to type Spotrac. But I think he's got like 2 years left, so he's gonna be overpaid. But, if you're overpaying by $10 million, but you get what you need, and actually I have no idea, 2021 it's an early termination option. I don't know if that's him or the team.
When you've got Rudy Gobert in your prime, you have to go all in, right? You have to try to win the title next season, despite there being all these other good teams. So, yeah, they got to spend whatever money they can right now.
Yep, that's right up your alley, right, Chris? And then, of course, the other thing is, despite the fact that rumors like D'Angelo Russell to Utah were coming out, we know how mistaken that is. But it's also possible, we've known this forever as part of the NBA, that teams will try and use people like Adrian Wojnarowski to drum up stories that aren't actually there. And I think Utah does know they're not a premier free agent destination.
Yeah, the first time Utah signs a premier free agent will be the first time. The first time. It's never happened.
The
there are
teams like
Utah and the Memphis Grizzlies. What's that?
Maybe Carlos Boozer was their biggest free agent ever? That's the one I can think of.
Yeah, that's probably right.
But to remind people, the reason that happened, and I think the way Utah won that is, Carlos Boozer had a handshake deal with the Cleveland Cavaliers. They were going to, normally they have as restricted free agency as a second round pick. So normally they get to say, we're just going to keep you for peanuts. And he said, I'll make you a deal. I'll opt out of my contract. You sign me to a longer contract for more money. It's a win-win. I get a raise. You get me for a discount. We're all happy. And then he went behind their backs. We're actually fully behind this for the record. So we're on Carlos Boozer's side. He went behind their backs and signed like a max-ish contract, if not a max contract to Utah. To your point, though, Chris, I think the reason that happened wasn't that Utah was a premier destination. I think it was because Carlos Boozer needed a team with the cap space to sign him to, and was able to do it subtly. And funny, if he'd gone to like the Lakers, what happens immediately is all of the, even at that point in time, because it's a little before social media, all of the Lakers blow up, and everybody knows Carlos Boozer is going there, and Cleveland says no deal to his proposal.
Yeah, and by the way, this was not when Cleveland is owned by, not when Cleveland was owned by their current owner Dan Gilbert. This is when they were owned by Gordon Guns, the kindly blind owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers. So Carlos Boozer stabbed a kindly blind man in the back.
Making me feel
That's
worse.
funny.
I have to look this up more. I was going to ask Chris, do you have anything else to wrap up on the Lakers? And I was going to say we'll have to pick our poison. We've got the finals, and we've got a few offseason trades, and we didn't go over the draft too much, but I think we touched on it enough. But we're hitting that point, and I also want to cheat and maybe ask you a little about blitzscaling and mental samurai. So I'll let you decide between kind of finals or other NBA topics.
Well, I'll go with a final thought on the NBA draft, which is the Lakers drafted Talon Horton-Tucker, who, of course, is a Clutch client.
Yeah.
And by the way, this should bring you back. This might actually make you happy as a Laker fan. Have you read the Jeff Pearlman Showtime Lakers?
I haven't yet. I do want to.
It is a fantastic. I know you've been traveling, so it was a fantastic audiobook. So I don't think the narrator was quite as good as you on Blitzscaling, but a pretty, and it went pretty fast. And of course, one of the funny things is I listen at 2x speed now, so a lot of times when I hear you in person, Chris, you sound like you're underwater. But what I was going to say about that is, back in the day, the Lakers, when they were acquiring these players like Wilt Chamberlain and Kareem, they were horrible with their own draft picks. Now, yes, they did get like James Worthy and Magic. Those were via trade. So anytime the Lakers had their own pick, you were just like, oh my goodness, what are you doing? I'm trying to remember. There's a chapter on the center they drafted at one point. Funny enough, by the way, Chris, I'm going to have to look this up. This might actually be a post now. It was very similar to Taco Fall or the player they drafted, where it's just like pure body type. And you're like, oh my God, this person looks like has so much potential. And this player was just horrible. And I believe Mitch Kupchak, I think was the GM, was just like, never again. But the Lakers getting the premier free agent while wasting their own draft picks is the Showtime era Lakers. So maybe you've returned to it.
I think that the key that the Lakers have to do is, they don't need to play these crazy games around asset accumulation. Yeah, bloggers like to write about that stuff. But at the end of the day, the name of the game is getting the great players. And they should leverage the natural advantages they have of being in Los Angeles to do that.
And I mean, what's funny is that there are two GMs, Pat Riley, formerly of the Lakers, and Daryl Morey. And I would argue their strength has always been acquiring big name free agents. And we criticize Daryl Morey all the time on things like Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson and Austin Rivers, et cetera, et cetera. But in the NBA, if you can't, that was the difference. The difference between Hinkie and Morey is Hinkie was able to do all this small stuff perfectly without ever landing a big name free agent. Now, maybe if he'd got another year or two, he would have. And we'd be talking about reigning GM of the year, Sam Hinkie, but that didn't happen. The reason Daryl Morey is an effective GM is he gets those couple of players. And it turns out if you get a Chris Paul, that makes up for 2 or 3 bad moves. And so the Lakers, right, they can make a couple bad moves. And in the grand scheme of things, a draft pick that's probably not going to get play that has some upside. I mean, you can't teach height is nothing compared to Anthony Davis.
And this really ties in well with blitzscaling, and that's a good transition because one of the things that the venture capitalist Bill Gurley said, and Bill Gurley is a very successful venture capitalist, led the investment in Uber, many other companies along the way. What Bill Gurley said is, we keep track of our failures, but our failures, we're not keeping track of the companies that we invested in that went to zero. We're keeping track of the companies we failed to invest in that became huge, iconic companies. Because the way you fail is not by making a mistake. The way you fail is by not making the big play.
Interesting. And then, of course, to our exact point on Anthony Davis, even if they completely failed, if you go up to Google and try and invest and they blow you off or whatever, fine. You can live with yourself. Whereas, and I know on your podcast, I'll rib you a little, Chris, because I know you brought this up on one of the former Chris J podcasts. Subscribe. It's on Anchor FM. Fantastic to listen to if you haven't. And unlike us, Chris, you make very digestible podcast links. So it's actually really easy to keep up and go through your archive. But you said you were at a meeting or at a party and someone came up and said, hey, I want you to meet this person. They've got this new product. It's online cloud storage. And you said, oh my goodness, there are so many of those. I don't want that. And it was Dropbox. So I know what you're saying. Those kind of failures. It's the Danny Ainge not going for Butler. That was your Danny Ainge day, which happens to the best of us.
I still regret it.
I'll defend you though, Chris, because my company was actually to market before Dropbox, and there was a million others back then. This is like over 10 years ago. But how are we going to know that they're the ones that made it out of all of them? Like, I mean, I guess that's literally your job, right, to figure that out. But to the rest of us, it seems very hard to figure out.
I got to agree with you there. And again, that was a bad call on my part.
Oh, but yeah, we'll give the last. It's a draft pick point, right? There's a lot of retrofitting to explain. Oh, here's why we should have known Anthony Davis was going to be great, or here's why we should have known this player we thought was great wasn't going to be as great as they were. And end of the day, sometimes it just happens. It happens. Let's see. There's a lot to talk on the finals, Brian, and actually some of it's bad. And I might want to push that off to another show.
Bad in what way?
Well, okay, let's recap. I tweeted about this. In one of the games, a part owner of the Warriors shoved dive for a ball.
That was bad.
Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, and Kevon Looney all suffered pretty severe injuries in the playoffs. All of them returned to play, with Klay Thompson and Kevin Durant sustaining a longer-term injury. And in the last game of the series, Masai Ujiri was waved onto the court by Kyle Lowry and was holding his credentials. And a police officer in I believe Oakland, so you're not going to be surprised there, Brian. An Oakland police officer stopped him, possibly shoved him. We don't have complete footage, and that's a little sketch at this point because
was it police or a security guard though? I
believe it was police acting as security.
Oh, okay, that's very common.
So that they were doing that, shoved Masai Ujiri and yelled at him, and actually a player or a staff member had to get in between them, and that kind of put a damper on Masai Ujiri's crowning achievement, winning a title. So the end of the finals for the Warriors, because that was the last game in Oracle, ended less than auspiciously. Even though what I will say this to the team, your team did really overperform. They kind of were the 2015 Cleveland Cavaliers. They performed much better than we would have expected.
Yeah, it's funny. All that stuff happened, and yeah, it's not even on the top of my mind just because the series was so good. The numbers were very close. Both teams shot the same effective field goals almost. They were very close in rebounds and in shot attempts and in a lot of things that matter. So yeah, it was a great series to watch, and there's some great games. And here's what I'll say about the injuries, though. I think this is probably what you're driving at, but Klay Thompson and Kevin Durant are going to get a lot of credit for that. It's like they threw their bodies on the line, and now the fans respect them, or something like that. But probably wasn't smart to do what they did, and I think we're going to be on the opposite side of what most of the fans think. Those guys probably shouldn't have tried to play again.
Yeah, I mean, I was very angry because right after Kevin Durant got injured, and I was like, this is a clear sign he was rushed. We get into semantics. He could have rushed himself back or was rushed back. We don't know the full behind the scenes stories, but right after that happened, Klay Thompson was getting adulation for going onto the court with an injured Achilles and shooting 2 free throws. And by the way, Kobe Bryant is
Durant who got the Achilles. Klay tore his ACL.
Oh, ACL. Okay. But I believe both him and Kobe have done that where they tear an ACL so
Kobe shot the free throws after tearing his Achilles. Klay shot the free throws after tearing his ACL.
Yeah. But yeah, same point. They go back, and he's getting, people are giving him adulation and respect for it. I was like, didn't you just learn? He's an amazing athlete, and I don't like trying this mentality that fandom has about if you don't completely sacrifice your body, you're not doing enough for your team.
I'll make something brief on this, Dre. I'm not saying it was necessarily the wrong choice for them to play. Like, they can make that decision for themselves, right? If they're feeling it, maybe they can give it a try. But it turns out they both got injuries that are going to take longer than the offseason to rehab, so it ends up hurting them. But it's like, here's what the part I don't like is the reaction to it. Like, people shouldn't say, oh, these guys are heroes. They should be like, that's too bad. That's really what I'm saying.
Yeah, I would agree with that point. But I mean, other than that, an amazing series, and of course, our boy Kawhi did it, and I did I did get to cash in my Vegas 30-1 season, $25. Of course, now my regret is I was like, man, I could have done 100. I could have been a little more. I was such a. By the way, this next season, Brian, is much harder to predict the NBA Finals. I think the Lakers are the current favorite, right, Chris?
They are the betting favorite. That doesn't mean they're the most likely.
Definitely true, but that's the point. Last year, when a 60-win team loses their playoff liability and acquires the finals, a finals MVP player, I was like 30-1. You are joking. Whereas next year, there's not anything as obvious. The Denver Nuggets, I believe, are 25-1. I'm a huge Denver Nuggets fan. I'm not coming anywhere near that bet.
If I were a betting man, I would wait until the offseason is over and we know what the rosters are, but that's just me.
I'll do the 2 free agent moves, both of which baffle me on good teams. The Bucks traded Tony Snell, who infamously has the line "Tony Snell does nothing well" from Brian. That was an inadvertent rhyme, but I love it. But he's an average player, so a replacement level player under Coach of the Year Mike Budenholzer. We'll discuss the NBA awards are going on 2 weeks after the NBA Finals tonight. We'll discuss those next week, I'm sure, Brian. The Bucks traded Tony Snell for John Lure, and this is weird because it's really a downgrade and it's a salary dump. And I've explained that's why it's bad that instead of Giannis being on the Lakers, it is bad that Giannis is on the Bucks, because you don't need your best team in the NBA cutting corners when they were this close to an NBA title. I think that's just overwhelming agreement. And then the Portland Trailblazers traded Evan Turner for Kent Bazemore, which just baffled me because Evan Turner is a reasonable player and Kent Bazemore is not. So, but the two.
When in doubt, it's about the money.
Yep. But so Brian brought this up. They're paid their contract length is the same and they're paid exactly the same. I have no idea. The only possibility is it looks like Evan Turner only played 1,600 minutes last season, so they might be concerned that he's not coming back healthy. I still don't know why you'd want to turn that into Kent.
Also, he's a team leader or something like that. So, yeah, this just seems like one of those things where it's like, we have to make a trade, guys. Let's do it.
All right. Chris, I had a very structured script, but I figured I at least wanted to bug you a little bit about you, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
So, because since I've got to assume, just based on your ping back response and even your Twitter, it's been a whirlwind, because it says since we last talked, and we did give you props on the show, you came in second on Mental Samurai. It was interesting. I'm trying to compare this in sports terms, because I think you were very, very lucky to make the finals. So you had no business being in the finals, but then once you got to the finals, it was a heartbreak because you were this close to winning the finals.
Well, let's not say I was lucky to make the finals, but let's say that it was very possible that I wouldn't make the finals because the timing on that question was so close.
Well, let me rephrase, because I'm actually stealing from your podcast. So I didn't feel bad. I wasn't trying to insult you. I was stealing you, because what we the viewers didn't realize, and Brian and I actually had a discussion about if it would have been better to film it this way, is this was basically kind of a seeded tournament where we were going in order worst to best, where you all ran the same course and the best 3 got to move on to the finals. And you were in the number 3 spot by the skin of your teeth, by a one. I think Joey Gutman, another competitor on the show, interviewed you on your podcast about it, mentioned that Sam Durbin, another competitor, one of the most popular, it's rough, Chris. I think he was definitely a better, more enjoyable to watch his runs than you, and I don't even think
I don't dispute it. He and Ryan Jones have this huge advantage of being flamboyantly gay. I mean, if I could do that, I would, but it's not me.
I'm going to say beyond that, just their what they say. I mean, obviously, I think so. Ryan, you said Ryan. One advantage he has is his real world job is he's a soul cyclist. He teaches a class, and the spin I didn't mean to do that pun. The spin he took on it is to make it themed. He'll come in costume, etc. If there was anybody that was prepared to be on television, Mental Samurai, for those that don't remember, all the contestants are basically put in this metal gyroscope and whipped around while they answer trivia questions quickly. And so if there was anybody that had the training to make that aesthetically pleasing to television, it was Ryan. And then Sam was also great at it, but he missed by
And he was a drag queen as well, and that's a performative profession.
Yeah, you won't take offense that the performers were better at performing than the author.
You know what? Not only am I not going to take offense to that, I will also mention that I feel like Dr. Jackie as well is more popular with America than I am.
Dr. Jackie was amazing, and so to my point of luck. So this was essentially a seeded competition where competitors, based on how they did in the regular season, went from worst to best. And you were in the number 3 seed, and you were sitting behind. Was it 3 or 4?
4 seed, and coming after me were Dr. Jackie, Ben Bergstrom, Gonzalez,
and so these
Murderers Row.
So these were the 3 best regular season competitors. So when I say lucky, that was the point. And you've even said on your podcast, you went the statistical odds that none of these people do better than 11, because you'd already seen one person get 12. It was a 12-question course. You got 10. You went the odds that these 3 do not get at least 10 questions, possibly faster than me, because Nurse Jackie is the show, the very popular one. Dr. Jackie, as you've mentioned, should eventually be a television show because she's amazing. Dr. Jackie had the fastest run, so it's like, I really don't have a chance. And then you lucked out in the sense that Dr. Jackie confused curling, the winter sport, with curling, weightlifting, and missed on question 1. Fun note, by the way, Chris, Appleton has a curling club that I drive by all the time. And one of the Olympic curlers for the U.S. does hail from Appleton.
The gold medal winning U.S. team.
There we go.
USA.
Absolutely. So you had that. You had Mental Samurai, which was absolutely amazing. And then I think you were trying to go. You've been doing keynotes for Blitzscaling. So Beyond the Lakers, how's that been going?
It's been going very well. So I am on the road for the 3rd consecutive week. I was in Canada 2 weeks ago. Last week I was in upstate New York and Southern California. This week I'm in Denver. I've got upcoming trips in all likelihood to the UK, to Copenhagen, to China, to a variety of other places. It is a lot of work. I'm not a guy who really enjoys all the travel, but you do what you got to do to spread the word.
And this is for the book Blitzscaling. And actually, that was I'll try and let that be kind of the lead up. So you and Reid Hoffman actually have done, and how frequently is it? Because I've listened to the first episode, I believe. So I believe let me get it right. It's Gray Venture, right?
So Greylock's Gray Matter podcast. And what the plan is that we're going to release a Blitzscaling episode every Thursday. So we're going to try to go weekly.
Holy cow. And you already had a first episode, which was fantastic. I got a funny anecdote on that, Chris. I was listening to that on my walk, and you were asking Reid about strategy and planning. And I walked past a Hoffman planning and design firm as he was doing it. I was like, this seems rather odd. But you and Reid Hoffman, absolutely fantastic. And you talk about Blitzscaling. And like I said, it's kind of bizarre for us where we're basketball fans, and I fully expected your first book with Reid as well, and Ben Kasnoka, The Alliance, which is about fostering talent and forming good employee-employer relationships. That seemed like it applied perfectly to the NBA. So I was shocked that Blitzscaling worked as well. But then, of course, instead of helping NBA teams get Anthony Davis, you're out doing real-world business.
Now, if any NBA teams are listening in and want to have me come and speak, I would be more than happy to do that. Especially, for example, the San Antonio Spurs, who were mentioned in the Alliance, and that was definitely my doing.
Yeah, and I mean, that absolutely makes sense. And it would be, although interestingly, I think they have kind of gone the Blitzscaling route, although possibly just, it's weird because they used to be the kings of talent evaluation, it seemed like. But, I'd say going for LaMarcus Aldridge, they did offer Kawhi a max contract, and then they did throw Kawhi for DeMar. I think they have definitely gone for, we're going to spend our money and go for it, as opposed for, the Pelicans route of we're going to rebuild. So
Can I go in real fast, Dre? The Spurs had Brandon Clark available, and I thought for sure he was not going to get past them. And he ended up going 2 picks later. They did pass him. So I don't know about the Spurs. What are they doing?
Well, what did they take instead?
They took his name's tough to pronounce.
The guy from Washington?
No, from Croatia, Luka Samanic. So maybe he's really good. Maybe they're good at scouting players in Europe, but one of the best players from the U.S.
I will never question the Spurs' international drafting ability with how they've been at it.
All right, that's all. Sorry.
And I mean, and to the same point, though, as we've just said, in the draft, you're not looking for fit. You should be looking for upside, and that's the problem a lot of teams have. And by the way, this is a random. I think Daryl Morey's proposed this, and I know Arturo Galletti was mentioning this. Really, free agency should be before the draft. So teams should restock the players they need on their team, and then they draft what they need. I think that small change would help a lot of teams out, but that's a topic for another day. But I did definitely want to plug some of your stuff, Chris. As we mentioned, Blitzscaling a lot. If you haven't read it, you read the audiobook, so it's available on Audible. It's an easy conversation starter. As I brought up to you today, I've got to believe he knows about it, right? I apologize. I have not kept up with Reid Hoffman's podcast, sans you, Chris.
Masters of Scale? I think
Masters of Scale.
Yeah. Masters of Scale podcast. Has he interviewed Bill Gates on that one?
So there was a Bill Gates interview. I don't know if they've put it out yet or not, but Reid has interviewed Bill Gates. And as you're noting, Bill Gates has this very interesting story that he told recently about his biggest mistake. So you should go ahead and tell it.
Yeah. So I pinged you and read about this. So Bill Gates brought up Android. And this is infamous for anybody, any Microsoft aficionados, because Steve Ballmer is notorious for making some mistakes in the phone business, and like I think they acquired a Motorola thing for a bunch of money. Steve Ballmer came out and said Apple was, the Apple iPhone was going to go nowhere, which is fun. But Bill Gates said that essentially it was a mistake of Microsoft not to get the Android market, meaning as soon as the iPhone made it very clear the mobile market was there, Microsoft was in a perfect position. And by the way, in the book Blitzscaling, you discuss lots of the problems big companies can have that get in their own way about this. But Microsoft was in a perfect position to basically say, the mobile market is there, we should have it. And Bill Gates said, in these winner-take-all markets, you can't really go substandard. And I think some of the metaphors he brought up is he said, you can't go out there with 90% of the apps or half as good of a product. So the point is, if Microsoft was going to go for that market, they needed to go all in hard instead of going, we're going to get a good enough product, and it doesn't need, we'll do the exact same thing the Bucks did. We'll trade Tony Snell to save $1 million instead of just going, no, we've got a chance here. And the language smacked so much of blitzscaling that I was half expecting, at the very end of the article for him to say blitzscaling, which he didn't, but he used language. So I've got to buy his talk to Reid about this.
No, absolutely. And again, Bill was kind enough to write the foreword for the book as well. So, and they've had a number of conversations. Reid obviously gets a chance to see Bill about roughly once a quarter for the Microsoft board meetings as well.
Well, I feel embarrassed there that I forgot that Bill Gates wrote the foreword. So that should definitely do a giveaway, although maybe I just assumed you did the foreword because I believe you read it. And they're in the book, it does get disconcerting a few times because you're basically speaking as Reid and yourself and other people. Sometimes like, is that Chris? Is that Reid? But so that's my.
I very subtly changed my voice very slightly.
Oh, nice.
When I'm reading as Reid or someone else, but it's very subtle.
And if you're playing at 2x speed, you might miss it. So. All right. Well, that's the egg on my face. I'll let Brian get the capper. Anything else he wants to bug you or anything else you want to say, and that can be our show.
Oh, no, I'm good. Just, great conversation tonight, guys, and thanks for coming on the show.
You know what? We got to pour one out for our boy Lonzo Ball, who is now with the Pelicans. I hope he has a great time throwing lobs to Zion Williamson and Jackson Hayes.
Yeah, I mean, it can be perfectly fair, right? They can go the Memphis Grizzlies route. After you've won a couple of titles, they can have a couple of deep playoff runs. We'll totally accept that. And I like that you're not petty. You're not a typical Lakers fan that is going to go, he's not on the team anymore. We don't root him. All right.
Yeah, I'm going to miss him. He's a unique talent, and I understand that we needed to sacrifice him in order to get Anthony Davis, but I'm going to miss him. And I'll miss Josh Hart as well. I'm even connected to Josh Hart on LinkedIn. I found out that he was on LinkedIn, and so he actually connected with me.
Holy cow, that's awesome! And we'll see. I mean, he could either one of them could potentially make their way back.
Don't tell him you like analytics, Chris. Then you'll be okay with Josh.
Yes, we'll avoid that. Although it's funny because it would be ironic. We tend to value him much more than most people because, from the analytical perspective, he's a good player.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a nice in. Okay, so again, Chris Ye, you can follow Chris on Twitter. That's spelled YEH is the last name. I believe you also have you did do your own website now again, right? Too, which is good. So it's just chrisye.com.
ChrisYe.com. You should subscribe to the Gray Matter podcast, where Reed and I will be sharing a Blitzscaling episode every Thursday for the next year or so. And you should go and tell whatever company you work for that they should have your good buddy, Chris Ye, come to town and talk to them about Blitzscaling.
Can I ask something selfishly of me? What does the Blitzscaling podcast do to your normal? Because you did have the Chris Ye show, and you had interviewed a bunch of people on Mental Samurai. Do you have any other Mental Samurai contestants lined up? Is there still time for that? Or is that gone?
Absolutely. I've still got a bunch of folks lined up. I just haven't been able to do it because I've been on the road, and it's much harder to do all these things when I'm on the road. But there are definitely a few more. The last one I definitely need to get is, of course, the grand champion, Heather Hurley. She's having some family issues right now. So put your best thoughts with her. When things clear up, I'm going to try to get back in touch with her and go ahead and hopefully get her on as well.
And if you're waiting on that, the Dr. Jackie, can you say the last name? I always get nervous.
Dr. Jackie Boehm.
Boehm. That is one of the most fantastic podcast interviews. And as I noted, the funny thing about the show Mental Samurai is the backstories of the contestants, to sound mean, are in many ways much more entertaining than the show, which that's fair because, you can't do a full half-hour biopic of each person, but you capitalized on that. And so there is a great backlog with a number of fantastic candidates that were on the Mental Samurai show.
Yeah, the amazing thing about it is, these folks come on the show and they have these fascinating backgrounds, and each time the backgrounds are actually 10 times more fascinating because they cut it down to a tiny bit. Like Dr. Jackie, we hear, she came to this country when she was very young, became the first person in her family to go to college, goes to Harvard Medical School, becomes this doctor. Leaves out the fact that she was a competitive power lifter, that she was a Miss Florida runner-up and beauty pageant contestant, and all these other things, which are just astonishing. A black belt in various martial arts, and these are all things that don't make it onto television.
And it was actually kind of funny for us, and I thought I might talk about it because I thought it would relate to the NBA draft, where your background on the show is like you went to Stanford at 15. And I was like, holy cow. And then, of course, they leave out that you're, a prolific writer and big name and venture capitalist. And as you mentioned on your show, Joey Gutman, another competitor, a fantastic lawyer and Jeopardy and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire competitor. When he interviewed you, something that I'll bug you offline because I don't know if it'll be the most entertaining radio, was you mentioned you were like a work from home dad when your kids were really young. And I've been doing the same with my kid for the last 2 years, and I was like, I want to hear more. I want to bug more. So,
absolutely. Well, we should go ahead and record something for the Chris Ye podcast about working from home with your kids when you're a dad.
Oh, and for me, for the first couple of years, it was. Sorry to take us a little long, Brian, but to mention the backlog of the Chris Ye podcast. I forget the episode, but you talked about one of your superpowers. You call it is napping. And something that you have been very smart and focused on, and I will admit is a failing of me, is not getting enough sleep. And so on that episode, you mentioned something that you did, and I was not as good, so I didn't get as much work done with the kid, is you were like, let's always make sure we get sleep. If the kid sleeps, I go to sleep. And I've heard this thing before, and I did not do it for the first couple of years of my son's life, which is what it is.
It's never too late to start napping.
Yep. I do power naps, so those are fun. But yeah,
excellent. All
right, sorry to have taken us long, Brian. Thanks for being the nice producer and letting me do it. I gave Chris's outro, so I'll just say boxscoregeeks.com. We go live every week, twitch.tv/nerd numbers. Usually on Monday, we're kind of back to that schedule. When we get it regular, maybe we'll start tweeting it out. You can find recaps of the show, channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube, and then we are on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geek Show. Host Dre Alvarez, a.k.a. Nerd Numbers. Co-host Brian Foster, Boxscore Brian, and special guest, man of the hour, Chris Ye.
And I'm going to have to come on again once the Lakers sign Kawhi Leonard.
Oh, dear God. and you might be banned. And as I mentioned, you might be banned from the show when the Lakers eliminate the Nuggets from the playoffs, which is just a part of Laker and Nugget history at this point. All right. Have a good one.
Thank you, guys.